Do you believe in evolution?
I believe in, that's a...
Come on, mate. That's not a hard question. It really is just a yes or no. It's either, yes, I do understand and accept the scientifically demonstrated fact that the diversity of life on this planet can be explained by the well-known, well-observed and understood mechanisms of evolution by natural selection, or no, I'm a fucking idiot, I have an anti-science agenda, and I don't like facts about reality because they make my big book of bullshit sad.
I believe in microevolution. I believe that there are real evolutionary processes. I'm skeptical about what's called universal common descent, the idea that all living forms have evolved from one single common ancestor.
Like I said, you either believe in the scientific understanding of evolution or you don't and are probably a big dumb. Microevolution is a creationist BS idea to try and desperately cling to some kind of scientific legitimacy while still effectively rejecting the complete scientific conclusion outright. Thus, no, you do not believe in evolution. You just really want to sound smarter than you are when you say you don't.
I'm profoundly skeptical about chemical evolution, the idea that the non-living chemicals in a prebiotic ocean or prebiotic soup arrange themselves to form the first living cell.
You're skeptical of chemical evolution, a thing that happens, and we have experiments that absolutely prove that it does. You know, I think what you're trying to say you're skeptical of, and this is me giving you the benefit of the doubt by basically saying you don't know what words mean, is that you're skeptical of abiogenesis, something that is, as of yet, not something we have quite proven. So yeah, either you're skeptical of something we know happens for a fact, or you don't know what it is. These are not great choices in my humble, very good-looking opinion.
And I'm also skeptical about the creative power of the mutation selection mechanism.
You know, the mutation selection mechanism sounds like a prog rock band from the early 2000s. And okay, you're skeptical of it. Good for you. Why are you skeptical of it? Is it because you have actual evidence that proves it wrong? Or is it because you don't want it to be correct? And which selection mechanisms? Isn't that just natural selection, the thing that we know happens and is basically the foundation of large swathes of biology as we understand it? I do wonder.
Which, as it happens, so are many leading evolutionary biologists today.
Are they? Well, I sincerely doubt that. And hell, even if they did, that wouldn't change the fact that, again, evolution is a thing that is supported by mountains of evidence. If a bunch of known scientists all fell down some set of stairs and came out the other end believing they could fly by flapping their arms real hard, that wouldn't change the fact that they couldn't. You have to flap your legs to fly. Much bigger muscles. Stands to reason. Well, flaps to reason.
I attended a conference in 2016 at convened by the Royal Society in London, the Royal Society being the oldest and most august scientific body in the world.
Well, that does sound impressive. You visited a thing that a bunch of smart people went to as well. That must mean you're smart too, and certainly not going to misunderstand or misrepresent the things they were doing and saying in order to support your presupposed ridiculous conclusion. That is something that creationists never do.
And it was convened by a group of evolutionary biologists who were essentially dissatisfied with neo-Darwinism, the standard textbook theory that we learn in all high school and college textbooks. And many of them were saying we need a new theory of evolution.
Well, presumably you're talking about New Trends in Evolutionary Biology, The Challenge of Extended Evolutionary Synthesis. A sexy title if I ever did hear one. And you are, of course, completely correct. They were there because evolution just isn't good enough. So we need to scrap the whole thing and start over. The same way that when Einstein introduced general relativity, all of Newton's ideas were immediately thrown in the trash and are now considered to be absolute nonsense. No way. Einstein, like many other scientists over time, built upon the previous ideas, and the conference you are talking about was doing much the same, looking to add to our current scientific understanding of evolution. They were not in any way seeking to replace it as if it were simply a useless thing now, you lying little shit.
The first talk at that conference was given by Gerd Müller, a prominent Austrian evolutionary biologist, and he simply enumerated the 5 major what he called explanatory deficits of neo-Darwinism.
I do so hate it when you guys pull this crap. You'll take science and its proponents discussing the current shortcomings and or flaws with whatever thing that you don't like, and then you'll act as if that means that the whole thing is bunk, when that is just not how it works. In fact, without these critical analyses, science wouldn't be what it is today. It is extremely important to recognize and attempt to excise any weaknesses in our current understanding. Doing so does not weaken those ideas, but instead turns them into the often incredibly tight, near unassailable ideas that they are today, that give us access to both the knowledge and progress we need to bring us all one step closer to the brighter future that we would all like to see. It's quite the opposite of how creationists do whatever they can to make sure their book is never criticized, and all ideas that show it to be the big book of nonsense that it truly is are thrown under as many buses as they can find, even if those buses are made out of toilet paper and spit and do nothing to those ideas in any real sense.
And his basic perspective was the mutation selection mechanism does a good job of optimizing or modifying pre-existing forms. It can generate small-scale variation, but it does a very poor job of explaining the origin of those forms.
The very basis of evolution is the fact that small, teeny tiny even, changes, when you have enough of them, especially over a long enough timescale, can lead to large, even extreme changes in those things. The very idea that this scientist didn't know that and seemingly argued against it seems incredibly unlikely, and even if he did, well, then he's wrong and doesn't understand what the rest of the scientific community understands about evolution and how it works, and would thus be dismissed as any kind of expert on the subject, especially if all he was doing was expressing an opinion and not presenting some radical new evidence for such a position.
Think about, for example, the Darwin's finch beaks. Great job of explaining how variations in weather patterns result in changes in the shape and structure of the finch beaks. But that mechanism turns out not to do a good job of explaining the origin of birds or other major animal groups in the first place. So,
holy fucking shit, are you taking the piss, mate? What, because one small set of observation doesn't cover the depth and breadth of our understanding of how evolution works, the whole lot doesn't get to be true? To go back to Newton and Einstein, that's like saying that dropping a ball on the floor doesn't explain orbital mechanics, so gravity must not be real. It's an incredibly stupid point, and I can only assume that you said it because you simply don't understand how ridiculous the ramifications of that are. Also, Darwin's finches demonstrate more than just the small changes. They demonstrate a very big change, an important one in evolutionary biology. It presents the concept of ring species, where two paths of evolution meet back up, but the creatures on each of the ends can no longer breed successfully because they have in fact speciated and are no longer the same thing, even though they all exist on the same line, technically. So much wrong in so few words, it's almost impressive.
Modification, yes. Innovation, no.
But modification over massive amounts of time, don't you think that would eventually lead to new groups? Because a lot of new groups have similar origins, or at least origins from one ancestor. You
know, say what you want about Joe, I'm not exactly a fan, mostly because of his terrible habit of bringing on conspiracy whack jobs and then sitting there at them for hours. But he is pretty on point here, which is funny, as this video is couched as Stephen here blowing his mind, when frankly, he sounds pretty fucking incredulous to me. It's almost as good as the time he went to the beach that makes you old.
I gotta tell you about this beach. It made me old.
You have to know that's not possible.
Look at me, man. I'm old as hell. And it's because I went to the beach that makes you old.
Well, time,
primates.
Yeah, time was always the hero of the plot. But let me just run a couple of arguments by you, and let's see what you think. Okay.
Time isn't the hero; it's just one part of the whole deal. And yeah, sure, evolution often needs pretty massive timescales for the kinds of changes that really show it working the way we tend to think about it. Although even over shorter time spans, it's still very much doing things. And yeah, It needs time. It also needs fucking animals and selection forces and other things. You're not dismissing those as the heroes of the stories, because then it would be obvious that you're just trying to slice out a part of the process and go, see, without this important part, it wouldn't work. Well, yeah, no shit. Cars don't work without engines. That doesn't make locomotion fake, dumbass.
And I developed these in a lot of detail in my book, Darwin's Doubt.
Oh, yeah, you gotta shill those shitty-ass books, ain't you, boy? I mean, everyone knows that books written by half-wits about topics that they want to be untrue makes them untrue. That's how science works. I'm sure it's not a bunch of misunderstanding, misquotes, mischaracterizations, misdirection, misapplication, and any other misses that you can think of right now. Oh, it might have Miss Isles in it too. That's how he blows your mind. Although it's not the only thing about this that blows.
If we now know, thanks to the genetic revolution, the molecular biological revolution, that if you want to build a new form of life, you have you have to have new code.
You make it sound like you have to get that new code from scratch when that's just not how that works, because that's not how it needs to work. The code of life forms, much like that of a computer code, which I'm sure you're going to bring up, is iterative. And while, sure, if you want to make something much more robust in its design, starting from the beginning every time you make it would do that, but it would also be incredibly labor intensive, which a god could do. In fact, one would think he would do that. But for some reason, the structures in the vast majority of life forms are exactly as I said, iterative, almost like it was in fact not created by some sort of perfect being perfectly. Weird that.
Because all new forms of life depend upon new anatomical, a fundamentally new type of animal, for example.
Well, that's just wrong. Again, evolution works on existing structures constantly. And even when one's form, they are essentially always an addition to another existing structure, like a limb growing from a torso or what have you. This idea that it needs to be something completely new goes so far against our current scientific understanding that I can only assume you got it from an only wrong answers machine. But I don't see Ray Comfort anywhere.
So you need new anatomical structures, but the new anatomical structures require new cell types, new types. So if you got animals that first come online and they have a digestive system, they have a gut. Well, you got to have enzymes that can service a gut, that can process food.
Well, sure, but the gut as it is in any given animal today doesn't just pop up fully formed out of fucking nowhere. It's something that develops over time, as we have already mentioned, but the things that come with it, they also develop over the same kind of time span. Or it's something that developed separately and replaced whatever the previous supporting thing was, or any number of other ways these kinds of parallel development can happen. But again, nothing just comes out of nowhere. And if you think evolution says it does, shockingly, you don't know dick all about it. Shonk.
So enzymes are types of proteins. Proteins are built from the informational code in DNA. So anytime you want to get it's just like in the computer world. If you want to give your computer a new function, you've got to provide new code.
Oh, look who's right. They always do the computer code thing, but it's almost always a completely false analogy, because the code of life forms and the code that humans have created just aren't the same thing. The only reason we use words like code to describe it is as a way to simplify the idea, to make it easier to understand the broad type of thing it is. But really, it's like comparing shoes to airplanes. The broad function, get from A to B, is there, okay, but they are so wildly different in reality, they simply aren't the same thing.
So we have these long digital bit strings of ACs, Gs, and Ts, not zeros and ones, but ACs, Gs, and Ts in a digital string.
Digital. What are you, high? Digital is a term that is related directly to computers and electronics. It has nothing to do with how DNA or any other kind of long-form genetic information works. And again, that's either you not knowing how to words or being deliberately deceptive. And I honestly can't tell which it is, but neither is good for you or any of your arguments. Not that they weren't fucking terrible anyway.
And we call that a gene. And if you have a section of DNA for building a protein, That's great, all works. Now, but if you want to build a fundamentally new form of life, you got to have new proteins to surface the new cell types to build the new anatomical structures.
I see you're trying to chicken and egg this shit, but you lack the capacity to spot a very obvious flaw with almost all of these kinds of questions. Because in a very literal way, the egg came first. Eggs existed in one form or another across all sorts of species, all the way and almost certainly beyond whatever a chicken becomes a million years from now, assuming that they do still exist. But I'll bet you they still come from fucking eggs. It's the same thing. The simple egg of some amphibious life form from billions of years ago, to the rough, simple eggs of whatever dinosaurs the chicken evolved from, to the robotic techno eggs of the future. The types of eggs develop with the creature. These other structures do the exact same thing. And your refusal to understand that doesn't do anything to undermine that simple and obvious fact about reality.
In our computer world, we know that if you start randomly changing the zeros and ones in a section of digital code, you're going to degrade the function of that code long before you come up with a new string for making a new program or operating system.
Well, way to demonstrate that you do, in fact, have absolutely no concept of how evolution actually works. Selection, Stephen. Selection. It's a really important part of what makes evolution work the way that it does. It's not randomly putting bits of code into an already functional system. It's making changes and then keeping them if they're good, or at least make no difference, and destroying them if they make the function worse. If you did that, you are never going to have a version that's broken before it does anything. You are going to slowly make improvements to it. Now, that doesn't mean it's not going to get extremely messy, which it absolutely is and does, but you know the thing about spaghetti code? It's still fucking code.
The functional sequences they're highly isolated in what's called sequence space. You can change a few things and still retain function, but after a very few number of changes, you're going to degrade the function, and long before you come up with a new function.
Maybe, but you know another fun thing that genetics can do? It can produce duplicates of any given function. So it can go on using that thing full in its original use case, while the duplicate could have anything done to it. It could be completely broken and rebuilt, changed in dramatic ways or small ways or whatever. And then one day it could slip into the place of the original function, able to do a whole new thing, or having removed a vestigial function while retaining the rest of its current purpose, or whatever. But that change happens with no consequence to the original gene sequence. Yeah, I actually found that out today, and it's pretty cool if you ask me.
Now, the Darwinian mechanism starts with the idea that there are random changes in those digital bit strings, those sequences of A's, C's, G's, and T's. And based on our experience in the computer world, we would expect that random changes are going to, again, degrade those strings long before they're capable of building a new protein.
Well, then obviously your analogy doesn't work and is missing something. But you failing to make a robust analog for how evolution actually works, again, doesn't change the fact that it does. It only goes to further prove you haven't got a sodding clue what the hell you are banging on about. No wonder you're on Joe Rogan instead of, say, the cover of Nature. Well, unless they wanted to do a piece on the man with no brain.
And there's now very compelling experimental evidence that that's true. There's an Israeli molecular biologist, Dan Tofik. Unfortunately, he died fairly recently in a tragic accident.
One can only assume that he was watching you make one of your incredibly stupid, rambly attempts to take down evolution. You said something so incredibly ignorant and stupid, showing both your complete lack of understanding of the topic you were addressing and consistent attempts to undermine the science that you pretend to be in favor of, and eventually you built up to something so ignorant, so dumb, and so utterly dishonest that he face-palmed himself so hard he accidentally punched his own fucking head off. Happens to the best of us. Bye!